So most of you all who are attending today know about Drupal for Gov, but for those of you who don't, Drupal for Gov is a community of open source advocates, and so we're interested in all things open source. So our biggest event is held every summer. This past year, it was held online, virtual. It will be virtual next year, July 27th through the 30th. We also do global training days, but due to the pandemic, we've kind of stopped that. But we hope when the world opens up again, we can again get together to do that. We also organize the Gov Summit at DrupalCon, and we do these webinars that we hold on a monthly basis. So if you're interested in contacting us, we have a Twitter. We are available on Twitter, Slack, and you can always email us at drupalforgov@gmail.com. And so every webinar that we hold, we record. And so they're always available online. If you go to YouTube and search for Drupal for Gov, you will find our webinar sessions in addition to other videos. And also Drupal's TV's curated playlist. So without further ado, I want to introduce our two presenters, Tim Lennon. So a little bit about him. He is the CTO of the Drupal Association. Recently, he has celebrated his 6-year anniversary with the organization. Yay. He's passionate about systems of collaboration and understanding the economy of open source. And last but not least, Tim Lennon, he's a senior technologist of the Drupal Association.
Neil Drubb, you mean, yes.
Engineering team. He's been involved in Drupal days since the early beginnings, and he currently leads the implementation of Drupal Gov, Drupal.org's GitLab migration, as well as writing integration between the issue queues and GitLab. And before you begin, I also kind of want to talk about our webinars that will be held in January. So in January, we'll have a webinar, Securing Coding Patterns in Drupal. And in February, we'll be doing one on Drupal 8 Configuration Management Basics. So again, welcome and thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can take control.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Great to be here. Let me get my screen share up. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping here. Hopefully that share is working properly. We are using the closed captioning tool built into Google Slides. So if anybody needs that, hopefully that will be working reasonably well. As a result, because it only picks up the mic input of one speaker at a time, we may switch who's sharing their screen so that you can hear Neil properly when we get there. But yes, I'd love to dive in. And thank you very much for having us as guests in this iteration of your webinar series. I see some familiar names and some folks I don't recognize in the list of participants. So thank you and welcome. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. I'd love to know where you are and where your crossover interests in Drupal are and all of those things as we get started. So we're going to go through some slides about the history of Drupal's contribution, both in terms of what the kind of metrics and milestones around contribution look like for the current year and the history of contribution, and then recent changes to the tooling. If you've been able to join, say, DrupalCon Europe or some of those other recent events, some of this will be familiar to you. We're trying to shout from the rooftops about some of these tooling changes that are really going to help contribution to Drupal and are already helping, as a matter of fact. So first of all, I mean, I think everybody here comes from a background of understanding the importance of the commons, the importance of public good. That's why we're attracted to open source. That's why we're attracted to government. And we know that no form of the commons, no form of the public good can be sustained without some form of contribution. In the government space, there's certainly taxes and all sorts of things that go into supporting this infrastructure. But for open source, it is freely given contribution that makes all this happen. And so what's some of the things that have been accomplished by this very recently this year? Module readiness for Drupal 9 is one of these big things that I want to highlight. So if you've been in the Drupal space for a long time, you probably remember how long it took for modules from Drupal 7 to have a Drupal 8 version available. You may remember the 6 to 7 transition, but thanks to a really strong effort by the variety of individual contributors to the Drupal project, we've had an incredible sort of transformation in how quickly things got done in the Drupal 9 release cycle. So right now, pretty much 50% of all Drupal 8 modules are also Drupal 9 compatible and working already. 85% of the top 1,000 used are compatible and working already. And this is all thanks to all of the contributors out there and some of the tools that they worked on together with us at the association to make that possible. So that helps set the stage for why I'm talking about contribution and its importance to the Drupal project and to all the end user use cases that we in our day jobs likely support, whether we're in government, nonprofit sectors, or other places. So let's dive into a little bit more of these details. So in this last year, just if you're curious about what the scope of contribution in Drupal has been like, there have been more than 32,000 issues fixed, more than 8,000 individual contributors and more than 1,000 organizational contributors. We've seen a 13% increase in contribution in terms of sheer volume, which is awesome. And since we released the new merge request feature that we're talking about today, the numbers are even higher than when I first created the slide, but we had more than 1,000 merge requests created within a few weeks and more than half of them successfully getting merged in. So we're seeing really awesome uptick from this because I think contributors are finding this a much easier way to contribute to Drupal and make it a better platform in CMS. And hopefully, as we show you how it works, you'll find that the case as well and find it easier for your own contributions or for helping your teams and colleagues to contribute as well. Lastly, just some general information about activity on Drupal.org. As you can see, we get about 10 million unique visitors annually, 65 million page views, lots of activity, 60,000 issues, tons of comments, all these sorts of things. About 22,000, 23,000 like engaged users that are confirmed users that do regular activity on the site, where all this contribution activity comes from. And one of our priorities at the association is to convert more of those 10 million visitors into those 22,000 visitors who are there and engaged and being active and giving back and maintaining the common good that Drupal is. So a little bit of history. There's people around in this call who've been around in Drupal for a very long time. There's people I'm sure who are relatively new to Drupal. So I think it would be fun to talk about this. I myself have been in Drupal. I've been in Drupal adjacent for 14 plus years, and I've been at the association, as Neka mentioned, for about 6 years. So a lot of this I've seen firsthand, but some of it's a little bit new. So going all the way back to the very beginning, a lot of this stuff was early versions of Drupal.org and early versions of Drupal contribution were all just patch workflows. And we started providing more tools. I say we, the folks maintaining this in the early days, started providing more tools, beginning to do tooling around code styling, but we were all continuing to focus on using patches and diff merges and all these sorts of things to understand our code contribution. Eventually, in 2011, we moved from CVS version control to Git. Drupal as a project, those early contribution years predated the existence of Git and certainly predated GitHub and all of those kinds of tools, which is part of why we were on this patch workflow for so long. So some of you may remember the great Git migration, as it came to be called. Neil was heavily involved in making that happen in those days. And then since really the move to Git, people have been talking about other kinds of tooling around Git and alternatives to the patch workflow. So, I mean, again, we looked at we've continued with patches sort of all the way through 2018, and then we kicked off a tooling analysis process, and we talked to a number of organizations. We talked to GitHub, we talked to Atlassian, we talked to GitLab. We did all sorts of things. We did evaluations of individual tools. We did community feedback rounds. And then eventually we settled on using GitLab as the tool set for, we settled on using GitLab as the tool set for future repository management for Drupal and all the projects, and for some of the tooling benefits that it would provide. Now you see on this slide, it says we did some of that in 2019, and depending on how closely you were watching, you might not have realized that. But that's because we sort of transparently replaced all of the Git repository management on the back end of Drupal with our GitLab installation. And then the sort of front end that you interacted with of that was still the issue queue exactly as it was still the patch workflow. But what that let us do was progressively build out new features. We got to enable inline code review. We got to enable the web IDE. We got to work on enabling the merge requests and issue forks, which we'll be talking about today. So I am going to hand it over to Drum to talk specifically through the issue fork and merge request workflow. So I'll stop sharing so that he can share shortly. And again, this is about finally making that transition away from the patch workflow and to our modern tool set, which I hope you will try if you have not already.
All right, I think that's sharing now. So yeah, we migrated it to GitLab, but initially we weren't using it for much. We were just using it to host the Git repositories, and it was a nicer way to browse through the code, but that's about all it gave us. And we went to get into using more features of GitLab, since GitLab, they're piling in new features every month. They have feature releases. And the big one is merge requests. And we want to do something a bit different than GitLab.com and GitHub.com, because the issues on Drupal.org, they're often collaborative. On average, in the last year, 5.6 people worked on each core issue. And that's true for a lot of the contrib modules as well, where if you're working on GitHub, it's your fork, your merge request, and the norm is that you bring that to resolution with the project maintainer. But we wanted multiple people to be able to jump in and contribute to any given issue on Drupal.org. So issues, those are what if you use Drupal.org, those are where we keep track of each improvement for the project, for a project. Issue forks are what we enabled first. That's basically a copy of the Git repository to draft changes in branches. And then the merge request is where you take one of those branches and ask the maintainer of the project to review and merge that. And the forks, they're really workspaces to work on work on code. We're using the term fork since that's the norm for if you use GitHub or GitLab, you know what a fork is. But yeah, they're really collaborative workspaces, and you can have many branches for each issue to work on different potential solutions if it's a type of problem that does have multiple options. So as of, I think it was a week into November, second week of November, every Drupal.org issue page has a create issue fork button if one hasn't already been created. And that will also, by default, go ahead and create a branch, which is good to work in. And once one of those is created for the issue, anyone with a Drupal.org account can get push access to that and push commits. For working on the command line, there's a show commands link, which expands what you need to copy and paste into your terminal to check out and work on one of those branches. Or you can use GitLab's web IDE for straightforward changes. Stuff like updating READMEs or documentation, or straightforward PHP changes or any code changes are good for working on in the web IDE. And when changes are ready for initial review, you can open a merge request. And that signals to other contributors and the project maintainer that the change is ready for review. So in GitLab, this is what one of those looks like. And once the merge request is open, if the project has testing, Drupal CI testing starts. And the real power of the merge requests are the collaboration tools around them. You can comment on single lines of code. You can keep track of whether those discussions are resolved or not. You can, as part of those comments, you can make suggested changes to or additions to that code. And one of the things we wanted to preserve about Drupal.org to make the transition easier is all of that activity shows up in line with the issue comments. So you can go to the issue page and you still have a linear list of everything that's happened with the issue and its merge requests, and can read straight through and catch up on what's happened. And there's less workarounds. You know, when we were doing the patch-based workflow, people figured out they could post diffs between different patches, and those were inner diffs, and people would spend some extra time and post those. And there was a code review tool called Predator. It was a browser extension, but that is no longer needed since it's built into GitLab. And keeping up with upstream changes is easier. Git does some of the tracking, so rebasing and using git merge will bring in upstream changes. And I think this is an older copy of those stats Tim had before. The place to look for these is git.drupalcode.org/project, and that has a link to all of merge requests. So the next steps are we're going to be solving some of the smaller issues as we find them, and improving some of the rough edges around this, and looking for more parts of GitLab to take advantage of. And the next kind of big one will be GitLab CI. That will replace, we have a Jenkins instance running Drupal CI right now, which if GitLab CI is a good replacement for that, that will be one less thing we maintain. So that has good potential to improve our infrastructure. And I believe I'm gonna give it back to Tim right now.
Sounds good. Okay, my screen share should be back up.
Yeah.
And yes, the closed captioning is continuing to work. Great. So these improvements are really only possible because of the people who contribute to supporting this common good, right? We at the Drupal Association do all of our engineering work with funding provided by the individual and organizational members of the Drupal Association. So we certainly ask you to try and support the association in these sorts of improvements by participating in those membership programs if you can, or by encouraging the organizations you work for to become involved in some way. Let me continue on. I want to show sort of a summary demo of the whole experience end to end. So Neil helpfully sort of highlighted each individual step in the process, but I want to show kind of a complete example and a couple other tips, and then we will switch to a question section. And I already see a couple in chat, so I'll go through those as we get there. So hopefully this will load. There's no audio on this video, so I'm going to narrate over the top of it. Okay, so what we're going to look at here is an example of like a core contribution being made with a merge request. This video is already slightly different in a few UX areas, but is more or less the same. So right here, we just are building a core issue in sort of the standard way with the issue template, saying a README needs to be updated. Now there's a new section here where I can create an issue fork for this issue. That appears again, as Neil said, at the top of every issue and automatically creates a branch that's tagged related to the issue, or named related to the issue. So once it's there, there's also a helpful section here that shows the Git commands if you want to do all this work on the command line. But for the sake of the demo, I'm actually going to do it entirely within my browser just by using the web IDE features of GitLab. So I do not have to have a command line environment, local dev environment in order to make a change of this sort, which is relatively easy scope, easy change. Hopefully this will help people who are doing documentation edits, code style fixes, little things, not have to worry about spinning up stuff on the command line. So as you can see, I just made an inline edit. I can now open a merge request. There's a button here, but even better, there are buttons for this that appear in the Drupal.org issue. So I'll show you some of that when we actually go to accept the merge request in a second. Most of the defaults here are already handled by what's done from the Drupal.org side and the integration, so you shouldn't need to touch anything with those buttons. But as you see, once it's open, we now have a status next to the issue fork saying that there is a merge request, whether it's in a mergeable state, and whether tests are running or configured, and I can add additional ad hoc testing, just like we could with patches. I can go in and comment on that merge request if I'm another user. You can do the inline code review comments as well. And as you can see, that comment activity doesn't just live in GitLab. It's pushed back here into the single stream on the Drupal.org issue. If I pretend to be the maintainer now and I'm going in to handle this after it's been RTBC, I can take a look. And down at the bottom of the issue, there is this new feature to select a merge and merge it in. And what this does is that it actually uses the crediting UI and the suggested git commit message to automatically create the right merge commit message that includes the appropriate credit for the participants and does all of the merge, and it marks that all done in the issue. And then I can finish it off by marking the issue as fixed, all that usual stuff. So that's pretty much the way that the merge request feature now works on Drupal.org. Again, it used, as you can see above, it used that git commit message, all that stuff. And this has been available for several weeks now. It's all ready to go. So let me run through a couple more features and a little Easter egg here as well. So in addition to everything that you see here with the GitLab issue forks and merge request, we have another feature for core issues only for right now anyway. Maybe we'll be able to expand it, which is, let's see, there we go. You'll see, again, the UX has changed slightly as we've continued to refine this, but on core issues, next to anything that has an open merge request, you'll also see a live preview button. So one of the Drupal Association partners, Tugboat, built a system for deploying live previews. So you can click that button and basically see a version of the site that has the current like core branch. So if you're developing against 9.2.x and there's a merge open against 9.2.x, it'll apply the appropriate merge commit so that you can see in a live preview and log into it and just check and see how it all applied. So that should help the sort of code review process, and especially help folks working on front end and usability sections of Drupal, which are a huge focus for the next year and probably next couple of years in terms of the Drupal project as a whole. So if you want to learn more about kind of what's going on, other things that are going on, this link, git.drupalcode.org/issue, will get you to more information and sort of summary issue information about what we're working on and what we're continuing to enhance. Also, if you have feedback and you need to open a child issue to say, hey, this UX needs fixed, or I found a bug or something, you can use that as a starting point. But from there, I'd like to go into questions. So what I'm going to do, I will take questions from the chat and I will try and read them aloud and answer them in the chat at the same time, I think. So let me scroll back up here a little bit. I believe the first question here is from Eric. Are issues going to move to Git.Drupal code eventually? So right now, issues are not planned to move to using just the bare GitLab issues. And there's a few reasons for that. I'm going to have to type my answer after I talk. I can't quite do both at once. But basically, that single-threaded collaboration style that we were talking about is something that we really wanted to preserve. And you can sort of do that in GitLab issues. But they're a little bit bare bones compared to some of the workflow steps that we're really used to. Like the core workflow, as you know, has these components across the top for which branch you're working against, what component of core, all sorts of things. Metadata that you can kind of work around using GitLab labels, but it's not quite as robust as we'd like. Certainly, we're going to keep looking at it as it continues to improve. And it's possible that maybe in some kind of contrib-only context, we might enable those things. But the immediate plan is to have this sort of tight integration so that we get the advantage of the things we do well in the single-threaded conversation and the things GitLab does well in terms of the code collaboration tools. So I think that's basically the answer.
Yeah, and issue credit will be.
Yes, oh, of course. So if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to type that out. I guess, you know, my
yeah, your captioning is still going, but it doesn't pick me up.
Yeah. So Neil added, I'll just repeat it so that it's on the captions. Neil added to my comment, contribution credits are also something built into the Drupal.org issues. We did talk to the GitLab team about whether they could add a similar sort of feature, but so far it hasn't been the kind of thing they can prioritize on their roadmap. So that's something that's been so valuable since we launched it. Let's see. Tim asks, is this available for every project or just core? It is available on every project on Drupal.org. So all of the 30,000 plus 40,000, almost something around there projects, including core and all of the contrib workspace, you can use this issue fork and merge request feature. So anywhere you're collaborating on Drupal.org, you should be able to do that today. The Tugboat live deployment preview feature, the question is, are there plans to roll that out in contrib and not just core? It's certainly the kind of thing that we'd like to do. We'd like to have that sort of tool. Obviously, spinning up, it's built in a very smart way where it uses base container images and only applies changes to those things. So it's relatively resource efficient, but if we looked at all the issues that are open on Drupal.org, if they all had active live previews, it's a lot of resources. So we're trying to manage the resources, make sure there's enough value, and then see what we can do in terms of scaling. So for now, core, we'll keep looking at trying to make more tools available for contrib as well. And that question was from Amy June. Question from Shalane. How are we able to include code that has not yet been merged through Composer as we currently do with patches? So I will try and speak out loud. Neil might have a little bit of a technical answer. So the truth is, it was a little bit of an anti-pattern and probably something we did not want to do, to be pointing to patch files and issue queues We all did it and still do it on all of our sites through the whole history of Drupal, but it was never ideal to be having to point to patch files hosted in issues that aren't actually merged. For something that's a merge request that hasn't been merged yet, you can download the patch file for that merge and maybe commit it to your deployment environment locally rather than looking for a remote hosted link to a merge patch. That's certainly one way to do that, and it's probably more stable than trying to do other tricky workarounds with which you can do by linking to a diff link, because that can go away when the merge gets merged in. That's my primary recommendation. It's a little bit of a change. The other thing is we are really hoping to keep pushing on maintainers to, you know, since merge requests are easier to apply and review and all this stuff, we're kind of hoping there aren't too many sort of abandoned merges the way maybe there was with patches.
Yeah, and if you're looking at running multiple merge requests, as you would like apply multiple patches, that's where you really need a patch file version of all of those to combine them.
Yeah, that is the other issue. So Neil adds, if you're looking to do multiple merge requests in your patches, you may have to make a patch file to combine those anyway if they're unmerged. That is a tricky spot in this space. Let's see, any additional questions or other things that we might support? Again, I'd really encourage everyone to give this a try. There's a lot that you can do using the new workflow. It's much easier to get involved. I certainly know plenty of developers these days who sort of grew up into their career never using a patch workflow. They all sort of started their career post GitHub pull requests. And so hopefully this will be much more familiar to anybody who's come from that kind of background and is able to do that. We saw some really great reactions to this from the community as it first launched. I'm just like thrilled to see that. And, you know, we're doing our, what do they call these things in the political world? A charm offensive? I don't know. We're doing a tour of all the places we can find to share these features and these improvements and talk about this. And I hope you'll help us to get the word out. If you or someone on your team might be interested in contributing for the first time, there is a global contribution weekend being set up from January 29th to 31st. So that might be a really good opportunity to work with this for the first time and to kind of go from there and learn how to get more involved. I believe that different folks from the Drupal contribution coordinator and mentoring group may be available during that weekend. They usually are. So that'll be good. I got one more question here from Eric. So Eric asks about Drupal Spoons. Is that now not needed or a totally different thing? That's a great question, Eric. So Drupal Spoons was an initiative by a group of different folks, and we've spoken to them about this kind of stuff. Basically, their idea was to see how much of a Drupal style workflow they could reproduce just using a totally vanilla kind of GitLab instance and workflow and features. So they came up with a way to configure those tools and to set things up to accomplish some of these things. And if you just want to host your project and contribute and you wanted to improve your contribution workflow by using merge requests, I think you would still stick to the Drupal.org tools. I think the Drupal Spoons is for people on sort of the avant-garde edge of contribution tooling who want to push for different kinds of features or experiment with different contribution styles, or for whatever reason are just sick of Drupal.org issues, which is fair if that's how you feel. But yeah, that's kind of the position. So Spoons, I'm grateful for that initiative existing because it helps push us to make improvements to the Drupal.org features. But I think we're in a really good spot right now where, like, if you just want a really solid contribution workflow for your modules, Drupal.org is a great place to go. Yeah, Tim responds to that as well. Also saw the Drupal Spoons pattern, found it a little bit difficult because it duplicates things in different places. And doesn't have credit. Yeah, the downsides, so Spoons is great if you're sort of an experienced contributor, you just want a specific workflow that's maybe different from what Drupal.org provides, and you don't necessarily care about things like the credit system. They have some alternate ideas for developing credit and things like that, which are all great, but like it's not fully integrated into the D.O stack. So my thought on that is just, we can't be prescriptive, right? These are, everybody involved in the project is a volunteer. They're all doing this on their own time. They have their own ways that they want to work, and that's great. That's part of open source. But from my point of view, I want to be doing the best I can with my team at the DA to build these contribution tools in a way that, you know, you can move projects, move issues between projects. You can do this and that. You can easily collaborate and cross-link because it's all in one central home on Drupal.org, which has been sometimes tricky to keep up with and manage, but also has been a strength of the Drupal community for a long time. Amy June adds a note that the Florida Drupal camp will also be having a Contrib Day on February 20th, 2021, all virtual, and we'll also have a first-time contribution workshop and mentoring. So thank you, Amy June. Let's see, and then Shalane asks, as a contributor, is there a good way to prioritize to-do issues to make that visible to others? That's a good question. I'll give two answers. So one thing that you can do, there are the issue states of like critical, normal, et cetera, for issues. You can use those as one method of prioritization. You can also use a third-party community tool called contribkanban.com that lets you take any Drupal.org issue queue and turn it into sort of a Kanban board. And then that leads me to another area, which I think might ultimately be a tooling improvement for D.O, is we could probably use sort of a more planning tool, planning view of issues and to-dos and tasks on projects like Contrib Kanban than what we have right now. I think that would be helpful. But those are my initial recommendations, Shalane, is you know, either the priority component on the issues or looking at a tool like Contrib Kanban. If that is all of our questions, again, thank you very much for your time and for listening to these topics. And also, I'm sure many of you are already contributors, so thank you very much for those contributions to the Drupal project. Yeah, it's great to have you. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday, and we can wrap up our side of things a little early here. And if there is any more business, I'll hand it back to Neka to walk us through.
Yes, thank you. This is really informative. And I'm hoping that when doing this webinar, because I have a feeling a lot of some developers don't know about this, so it's good to spread the word. So thank you. And just another reminder for January, we're having our webinar will be on securing code patterns in Drupal by Sam Mortensen, and in February it'll be Drupal 8 configuration management basics. And I think that's it, everybody. Happy holidays, be safe, and talk to you next year.
Thanks again, happy holidays, happy new year. Thank you again for having us. Bye-bye.
Thanks.